Hey there YouTube, welcome to Big Mike Beard Wisdom. So today I was going to start doing the timing belt, and anytime you do a timing belt on an older vehicle, there's always the chance you're going to have like seals and other stuff that are leaking that you're going to wind up running into. So far today I found the valve covers leaking when I went to go do the spark plugs. So sometimes a simple maintenance job can get a little bit more expensive. In this instance, these spark plug boots have a little bit of oil on it, on this side and this side. And what it's going to wind up coming down to is that in here, you can see the little bit of oil, just a touch in there. That one's nice and dry. That one's pretty wet. And normally what happens is that your valve cover will leak at the little seal that's right here. So most valve covers that have a little extra seal set for your spark plugs. So in this situation, I'm gonna hold off on doing the spark plugs till I can order in a valve cover gasket and do the job right the first time. And hopefully just once. And then besides having to replace the valve cover gasket to reseal these holes, I've also got a little leak here in the corner, which hopefully it's not this actuator. Hopefully somehow that's still valve cover gasket. But that does not explain the whole bunch of leaks I got down there, which I'm expecting to be the oil cooler. And that's a job I'm not looking forward to. Oh boy. Now I've been smelling a little bit of burning oil, but I didn't quite know where the leak was coming from. But if you look up right there, you can see that dark drop way up high. So that right there is an oil cooler that's back behind the exhaust. And I'm pretty sure that's where this oil leak's coming from. It's kind of a cool oil cooler, so no pun intended there. And it's part of the oil filter housing. So not an easy job and not an easy thing to get to because of this being a northern car. So everything down here is rusty. So I'll need to take these bolts loose so I can drop the catalytic converter out and the manifold. You can see these heat shield bolts here. The actual heat shield itself has rusted free. That one hasn't yet though. And when I go to do this, I need to take the heat shield off so I can get to the bolts on the catalytic converter and the manifold up top. And if you look at the dipstick tube, the dipstick tube's looking a little rough too. So I've got to take that loose so I can kind of just tilt this off out of the way. And that may be a problem depending on how rusty this is. So first things first, I'm going to start hosing everything that I can down with a little bit of rust penetrant and start hoping for the best. So a lot of times if you're working on something and you don't have anything that's guiding you on it, so whether or not you're looking something up online or you're just jumping right into it, it's one of those things where taking a couple pictures with your phone really helps, or in this case taking a video hopefully does plenty. So there's these two bolts, one right there and one right there, that I'm going to take loose real quick. And then I'll take loose those lower two that we could see earlier. And then I need to remember that this side is the side that holds the dipstick on. And that these are E12 external Torx bolts. The dipstick moves pretty easily just off to the side. That way it clears out of the way. So it's probably held in at the bottom with just an O-ring. Once I took the bolts off at the bottom, so the bolts are a different size at the bottom. The bolts at the bottom are actually like an E10 as opposed to an E12. And there wasn't quite enough room down there in order for me to get a 3/8 drive socket on. So I wound up going with one of the gear wrenches that I have, where they fit a whole bunch of different shapes and sizes. And that worked perfectly on those. Then, as I was trying to take it loose, I noticed this bracket right here was kind of in the way. So this is another E12. Once that was out of the way, I decided I didn't want to try and mess with the O2 sensor. But the dipstick tube was fighting me pretty good. So all I did was take the dipstick tube, rock it left and right a little bit while pulling up, and it popped straight up. So this came out pretty easy. You can see the O-ring that it seals to down there. And then that came out. Next, because I pulled that dipstick tube out, started to leak a little bit of oil. So if you're going to do this, I would highly recommend maybe draining some oil first. But if you're really seriously looking at doing the oil cooler right away, so you've got the parts already, I would highly recommend opening this up and draining the coolant, because that's going to be the next big mess you're going to make once you start trying to tackle the cooler itself. For me, I'm still in the process of trying to identify that it's actually the cooler leaking. I just want to try and take everything off the front of the engine, that way I can see and rule out anything else that might be. Next up is way down here. So at the bottom of the manifold and catalytic converter assembly is this point. And then you can see there's 3 bolts here that I'll need to take loose. So I'm going to try these first just to see how far I can get with them. You can kind of see they don't have any thread left. So these are rusted pretty bad. I'm half expecting these to just snap as I go, but it's almost like I can see that there's studs up here. So worst comes to worst, if they do snap, as long as they take the nut off with it, it should be able to separate. I got that loose. And just to make sure that everything was exciting, it came out 3 different ways. So the one in the rear wound up being a 13 millimeter. Now, the flex pipe on this has been replaced before. Because you can see the different types of pipe they used. And there's actually a small leak in the weld on the upper side of that one. So this will give me a chance to fix that while I'm here. But it just goes to show you the hardware is not always consistent. So that rear one that you really couldn't see is a 13 millimeter. The other 2 were 12s. This one broke off. This one came out with the nut still attached. So it pulled basically the stud out. Then this is still usable and will probably work fine. This one though, once I get that manifold out, I'll have to drill it out. Or I may be able to grab onto that with something and twist that stud out. So with those loose, next up are the manifold bolts. So there's the ones down here. So there, and there. These should be accessible through the little access holes here. And then these up here should be pretty simple to grab and get to. Similar to that bottom piece, how the whole stud was coming out, I'm getting with that on this bolt over here. So you can see it took the whole stud out. But I should be able to run this one back in and hopefully get it just as tight as it needs to be. I got all those bolts and nuts out. So only lost the one stud there. And then these are all 10 millimeters. And they're pretty rusty. So this is probably a situation where it behooved me to replace these, as well as replacing the gaskets on both sides of the exhaust manifold. Alright, so I tried shaking this pretty good. Couldn't get it shook loose. But I'm pretty sure there's 2 bolts on the other side that holds this in place. Alright. So right here, you can see one of the bolts. And right there's the other one. So I'll get those hosed off real quick. Hopefully they break loose nice and easy. Or I shouldn't have said that. Alright. So, got that all worked out. One of the things that kind of came in handy was this hose right here. As I was working it up and around, was kind of getting in the way. Luckily, there's plenty of room that this thing moves quite a good bit. So you're able to take it loose from over here, loose from here, and loose from right there to open the space up just a little bit to help get it worked around. In hindsight, I probably would have just removed this header panel here. It's pretty simple. There's just a couple bolts, a couple screws hold the actual grill in, and then that would allow me to take the intake out of the way and free up even more space. But as we're looking down inside of here, you can kind of see that it's kind of messy. But for the most part, it's dry at like the head gasket area, so up high. So more than likely, all this oil leak is coming from the seals where it meets the block back there. So more than likely, all this leak is coming from this oil cooler right here. And you can do stuff where basically you buy the entire oil cooler. Otherwise, you can buy a kit that has a bunch of gaskets. But I'll price it out, see which one makes more sense. These hoses here are coolant passages. So this is a coolant passage, that's a coolant passage. So if you're doing this, you definitely want to drain the coolant before you get to this point, because it's going to dump out when you shake these suckers loose. And then that's the oil filter housing. So just to give you a point of reference where the cooler's at. Is that a fly? It is a fly. Wow, the valves don't look too great. Seems like quite a lot of buildup on them. All right. Anything else interesting to be seen down here? Not really. Alright, so it looks like there might also be a little bit of a leak coming from the solenoid over here. Otherwise, that might be the valve cover. And then another symptom of like if that's leaking a little bit is basically your coolant looking pretty brown and funky. So it's a little bit of oil getting in your coolant, which could be the case here. Considering it's pretty nasty looking. Alright, so around the crank, up and around the AC, up and around the water pump, back to the alternator, all the way around the tensioner. Alright, so I'm at a pretty good point. I'm going to call it a day. So we found the valve cover was leaking on the center sections in the spark plug tubes. I pulled the valve cover off just because I could. More or less because I want to take a look at anything in here. It's just to see if there was anything that needed to be fixed or repaired. Or if there was any oh crap moments, in which case it's time to, you know, rethink working on this engine and maybe switch to a different engine. Then I got all the timing belt stuff exposed and ready to be done. Then we've also had a couple codes for the timing being a little bit advanced. So I pulled out one of the solenoids just to see what they look like. And a lot of times with these, especially when GM first started using these are super susceptible to a little bit of junk and stuff getting into those screens. And as soon as you get it into the screens, it starts to have issues. Now you can take some brake clean and clean it off, but it's not going to fix the issue. You really just need to replace them. Then on the front part of the engine, pretty much came to the conclusion that it's definitely this cooler that's leaking. So that was a hoot trying to take that off. The exhaust came off. Not super easy. I'm definitely going to want to probably order these bolts and nuts, or the stud maybe, but these nuts definitely. They're super rusty and they were super weird trying to take them off. Like they felt like they wanted to strip out. So that's going to be something to replace. Same thing with the gasket, where the manifold and catalytic converter seal to the head. The gasket where the catalytic converter pipe seals to that lower pipe. But on the bright side, there's a little hole just right up in here where whoever welded this wasn't able to weld it completely. I think because they were kind of like me and scared to take those bolts off. So I should be able to grab my welder and weld that shut, which should help with the code that I've been getting for the Rero 2 being lean. So sealing up that hole will help stop any kind of exhaust gases from escaping. So all in all, not a bad day, just a long, dirty day. And definitely learned that if you're going to pull the dipstick on one of these 1/8s, definitely drain some oil first. You're going to make a mess. Sometimes you just got to walk away and know when to order parts. But I'll check you guys next time, once more parts arrive. So, a lot of times when you're tackling a job you've never done before, and you're not using any kind of like literature to help you out, a picture a lot of times worth 1,000 words. Ooh, this kitty litter smells good. Hey there YouTube, welcome to Big Mike Beard Wisdom. So today we'll be working on the Astra, and man, it goes sideways.